Again, you're being an activist. I am
That's not appropriate, sir.
Who are you with? What's your name?
That's not an appropriate question for you to ask.
You're going to ask how many questions? You get 3?
What a stupid son of a bitch.
Welcome to another episode of Friendly Fire, a show dedicated to all things libertarian. That includes candidates for public or party office, bill reviews from a libertarian perspective, and even matters regarding the party itself. Unlike other shows, Friendly Fire exists to be critical and tough, but fair and honest. Today, Lars Mapstead joins me to discuss his candidacy for president for the Libertarian Party. Please welcome Lars to Friendly Fire.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Fantastic.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me on Friendly Fire. And we're just I should probably shift over a little bit here. That way I'm like kind of more center. We're going to go ahead and just dive right in. So first thing, let's just kind of do the standard, introduce yourself and tell us what motivated you to run for president, run as a candidate for president for the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, absolutely. My story is kind of the American dream, I guess. I grew up really poor. I grew up with an outhouse and no electricity, and actually lived in a goat barn for a while.
Wow.
So, I was on welfare when I was a kid, and we were poor. My parents were just basically did gardening and odd jobs, and we didn't have a lot of money. In the 90s, I was fortunate enough to have some good grandparents that helped me get a computer, and I found my passion and love in life and what would become my career. And in 1994, the internet came around, 1993, 1994, and I was an early adopter in that space. When Mosaic browser first came out, I was in the internet, right? And I found that I had a knack for marketing and for computers, and I put those together, and I just started becoming a serial entrepreneur. And I started, my first business was a hosting and website design company in 1994. And then I just kept like starting businesses, selling businesses, and I had many successful ones. But ultimately, that culminated in a company called Friend Finder Networks, which my partner and I grew to 600 employees, doing $350 million in annual revenue. And we sold that in 2007. And then I started I'm a big car guy, and I started a bunch of car pages on Facebook in 2007. And those were supposed to just be a hobby and for fun, but that actually ended up turning into a 10-year business that was very lucrative as well. And I ended up with 25 million followers on Facebook on various Facebook pages for my car pages. Okay. And so, what led me to running for president was I was watching the George Floyd riots across the country and burning of cities and just people being extremely pissed off. And then I was watching the January 6th, activities and all the stuff that went down at the Capitol. And I realized everybody on the left and the right are pissed off, and all the independents are pissed off, and all the third party people are pissed off. Everybody's angry at the way America is going, right? And they're angry for different reasons, but everybody's pissed off. And I think, I just thought there's got to be a better way, that we keep electing these people that are divisive, that are simply trying to pit one group against the other group, trying to use government coercion to force the other group their belief system. And I thought, we need to offer some different solutions. We need to offer a different way forward for Americans, something that can kind of bring us together and move America forward without all the toxicity that we have going on right now. And so, I was looking at Joe Jorgensen and Spike campaign, and I thought, what? I can bring my social media abilities and my marketing abilities to the Libertarian Party, and I can spread my message a lot farther than what's been done in the past. And so that's really, what I'm working on, is to unrig the system. If I say the system is rigged to you, that brings something to your mind, whether it's criminal justice or the healthcare system or the economy or whatever it is. Everybody feels the system is rigged in some way, shape, or form. And so my message and my idea is to unrig the system, right? To shine light on the areas where people are irritated and pissed off at the system, where government is coercing them to behave in a way that they don't like, and then offer solutions to get out of that situation.
Okay. So let me ask you then about your ability to market. And you said you mentioned, hey, I would like to bring this to the Libertarian Party. So is this your first effort toward bringing that skill set to the party?
Yeah, I've been a voter for a long time. Obviously, every election I voted for, I've always been kind of an independent, mavericky kind of person. I voted for Ross Perot, and then I voted for Ron Paul, twice. And but I didn't know I was a libertarian till Gary Johnson was running, and in 2007 or eight, I took one of those quizzes on Facebook that everybody was passing around, and I thought, oh, this will be funny because I've never felt like I was a Republican or a Democrat. I wonder what it'll pick me as, right? And it said you're a libertarian. I was like, what is a libertarian? And so I literally had to Google it, and then I was like, oh crap, this is who I am, right? And I didn't even though I had voted for Ron Paul, I didn't put together that he was a libertarian. I just voted
Right.
for him because I liked his messaging, right? And so, like, one of my goals in this campaign is to get as many Americans as possible to Google what is a libertarian, because if people like look it up and they resonate with it the way that I did, we can really grow this party and we can really grow this movement across the country. And I think that that's what we need to do in order to kind of arrest this division that we have, right? That you can be left or right, doesn't really matter, as long as you believe that the state should be reduced, and that you know how best to run your life than the government does, and we need to get the government out of our lives as best as possible, right? And I think that that's really the thing that binds all libertarians together, right? That's our core principle, is that we want less government. Some of us want all the way to zero government, and some want like 10% of the government, but we all want to reduce the state, and I think that's the common goal that we should all be focused on.
So that's the common goal that we're focused on, but it feels like that's not necessarily the common goal that the general electorate is focused on, right? Like they might say that occasionally, like, hey, we need a smaller government, but it seems to be more along the line of basically trying to one up the other team, right? It doesn't really seem to be a core focus for them. So how do you take the message and um, like how do you get people to kind of shift gears in the same way that you and many other people did? You said you supported Ron Paul because you liked the messaging. So
Yeah.
what is it, I guess the real question here is, what is it about your messaging that will resonate to other people like it once did for you, particularly in light of people seeming like they want to one up the other team as opposed to really be focused on, what government really is just too big.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is the messaging has to kind of lead with emotion, right? It has to lead, we have to tap into people's emotions, and we have to tap into the way that they feel. And as I kind of explained earlier, everybody's pissed off, right? And so we have to tap into that, but like offer a solution to get out of it, right? And I think that like the Overton window seems to be shifting right now a little bit. You see other candidates in the duopoly are starting to talk about reducing the state, right? And so in some ways I feel like libertarians have been talking about, say, legalizing marijuana for decades, right? And it's not, and we had some output in or input into getting drugs or marijuana legalized in different states, right? But in the end, it was when the duopoly embraced our ideas that it became mainstream, right? So I think that a lot of libertarian ideas are kind of in front of the general public, right?
Mhm.
And so we just have to keep pushing the message, and eventually the general public adopts our message, right? We have to keep with this kind of base messaging and let them know, like, hey, this is a real deal, right? And so now you have these other candidates starting to push it, and it's starting to become more mainstream because the Overton window has shifted, right? So we just have to continue with our messaging, and my idea is that a lot of government coercion isn't necessarily from the federal level, right? Where government coerces you the most is at your local and state level, right? When the lockdowns happened, it wasn't the federal government locking you down; it was your county and your state that was locking you down, right? And
Right.
that was where the coercion really came from. So I'm a huge fan of building the movement from the ground up. I'm a huge fan of local candidacy. I'd like to see as many libertarian candidates on every ballot across the state as possible. And I'm working to affect that change, right? We're offering candidate training for anybody that's thinking about becoming a candidate. They can come and get free candidate training through my candidate training that I'm offering. And we're supporting down ballot candidates financially and also through social media by platforming them. And we'll be doing a lot more of that as more people, kind of get the message out. And then as I've been traveling around the country, I've been meeting with down ballot candidates also and working with them on messaging and just, encouraging them to keep going, right? Because I think if I could see a ballot, if I got my ballot and there were more L's on the ballot than there were R's and D's, that would be something, right? People would then Google what the hell is a libertarian? What
Right.
is this thing, right? And so I think that's the kind of movement that we really have to be pushing for. We have to be encouraging as many candidates to run in as many states as possible. And of course, the system is rigged against us there through ballot access and through
Right.
primary systems and all that kind of and winner take all systems. And so that's part of my messaging is that we have to fix this base of our elector system or our electorate system, right? It's just completely broken, and we can't have a republic if no one trusts the actual voting system, right? If no one trusts the way that it works, and you can't have any other voices right now, right? The voices are so suppressed, and so that's one of the big things that I'm pushing for is just to educate Americans that, like, yeah, Democrats think the electorate system is broken, and Republicans think the electric system is broken, and libertarians know that the system is broken, right? Because we see the suppression firsthand, right? And now the other parties are starting to see that suppression, right? You're seeing RFK getting suppressed by the Democrats. You're seeing some people on the Republican side just completely being suppressed and not allowed to participate, right? So I've gotten really cynical with elections. I feel like the two people that we end up voting for are almost always chosen for us, that we have the illusion of choice, and that some of these people that are running are basically just sheepdogs, and they're there to like make it look like there's somebody running against them, and then in the end they just capitulate, so it's there's a lot of moving parts. Politics is just really dirty, and we have to be in there swinging and fighting every step of the way.
I gotcha. So you're right. Politics is extremely dirty. When I last year in 2022, I interviewed, I don't know, some 20, almost 30 candidates, just in general that were running at, state and local levels. And I heard some interesting stories about, some of the things that were happening to some of those candidates.
Yeah.
So given that we know that politics is dirty, are you prepared to roll up your sleeves and basically fight back? And what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, I think, we have to go outside of the Overton window and message what our base messaging essentially, right? That we can't like back down and just kind of go with the super pragmatic situation, right? We have to get a little bit more aggressive with our messaging. And what's interesting is you see some of the other candidates on the other sides are starting to push that window, like I said, and it makes our messaging not sound as radical anymore, right? Because the window is shifting. And so I think that really helps us because as these other candidates are, lose their primaries, right? That messaging we can, continue with, and those people that were like resonating with that messaging on the duopoly can shift over to the Libertarian Party and say, hey, these guys are doing that same messaging and that I liked in those other people. And now they're the only people that are going to be on the ballot, right? So I think that it's really good for us that these other duopoly candidates are adopting our messaging.
So when, in the party and, the first things first, the candidates for the presidential nominee, they all have to get past the libertarian delegates. And right now, one of the big issues is, messaging, like what should it look like? And you've mentioned a couple of times, like we're radical and that, shifting the Overton window and all this stuff and saying, not backing down. So is there a line? Because a lot of the issues with the messaging are like, hey, you guys are going too far. Hey, you're not going far enough. Where is the line for you? What does the proper messaging look like for you?
Yeah. I think what we're trying to do, and I fall short of this sometimes, but what we're trying to do is reach the most people possible
Mhm.
with with the message and not turn people off. Turn as few people off as possible, I think is part of the goal, but still maintain that messaging, right? So it has to be crafted a little bit to kind of encompass all the people. It's a challenge that I deal with every day when I'm putting out stuff on social media. I'm trying to decide like how far should I go with this, and it's kind of I call it like the North Star, right? Like, so let's take taxation as an example, right? You know, everybody in the Libertarian Party would agree that taxation is theft or taxation is extortion, and that we should, have as little of it as possible. And a lot of people say we should just have zero taxes, right? And so let's say that zero taxes is the North Star that we all want to get to, right? Even if I became president tomorrow, we're not going to get to zero taxes, right? Because there's a Congress and there's realistic things that can happen, right? But I will move in that direction as much as possible, as quickly as possible, right? So if Congress comes to me and says, "Hey, we've got a bill that's going to reduce taxes 10% across the board," I'm signing it, right? Just because that will get us in the direction that we want to go, right? And I think we do have to take those baby steps sometimes, just because that's what we can get, right? But at the same time, we should still be messaging that like taxation is theft, and that that's where we'd ideally like to get to, is the least amount of taxation possible.
Got it. What is your most radical position that you, and I mean from the perspective of the general voter?
Wow. I guess, I really want to abolish the IRS. That's like one of my main things that I really want to do. And there's a lot of alphabet agencies that I'd like to get rid of, right? And FBI, the ATF, the Department of Education. There's a whole laundry list of things that should go. It's really, there's a lot of people don't know this, but there's a book that's put out by Congress called the Plum Book, and people can look it up, the Plum Book, and it outlines something like 4,000 or 7,000 positions that the president gets to appoint. Okay. And some of them are, you have to go through Congress to get the appointment through, but some of them you just get to appoint. And I sort of learned about this because if you remember early in Donald Trump's when he became president, there was a lot of people complaining that he hadn't filled the positions. Like he left a lot of positions unfilled, and that meant the government wasn't working the way that they'd like it to work, or that there was roadblocks or whatever. And I thought, oh well, that's fantastic. What if we get in there as president and we just don't appoint those positions, right? We just clear across the board, we just don't appoint any of the positions. And then if Congress thinks those positions are important, they can vote on it and make a law that says that this is an important position, right? So I think, like, I would like to I think one of the things that's kind of radical is I want to vastly reduce the power of the president, right? I want to get rid of the executive order as much as possible. I want Congress to do their job, and then the president has the authority to veto or push through what Congress says, right? I think Congress has delegated its job out to the president, and that I think in some ways that's part of the division that's going on, right? Because there's no dialogue, there's no debate anymore. They just give it all the authority to the president, and that, when you have that kind of ruler-esque attitude, that's why we rebelled against Britain, right? We didn't want a king, right? And so I think Congress has kind of made a king out of the president, and so I'd like to roll that back a lot. So I think that's kind of one of my radical ideas, is just to like really cut back on the office of president. I'm starting to look at executive orders, going all the way back and figuring out which ones I would like to just completely abolish. And then if Congress thinks that should be a thing, they can vote on it, right? And if I don't like it, they have to get 2/3 to get it passed, right? So I feel like one of the things I say all the time is, if a Congress can't pass something with 2/3 majority, then maybe it shouldn't have been passed in the first place, right? I feel like if we're going to pass big stuff that's going to force Americans to do things, then 2/3 of Congress that represents you should be able to pass that, whatever that is.
Got it. So a moment ago you mentioned the IRS and abolishing the IRS. Now that's obviously going to be an extremely difficult task. First and foremost, a candidate that's willing to do that has to actually get elected. So that's going to be a very tough challenge right there. Then on top of that, let's just say in the perfect world, we do see a libertarian president. They're going to be facing an extremely huge uphill battle. So on your website, in relation to the the IRS, you've got, one tax code for everyone, no more loopholes, no more tax breaks, no more 50-page tax reforms, no more IRS stress. So let's assume for a moment that you were to become president and you want to move forward with some of your plans with the IRS, but the one thing that you can't seem to accomplish is abolishment altogether.
Yep.
How do you address these things? Are you still able to do something toward these things like no more loopholes and tax breaks? And what would that be that you think you could do, even if you couldn't go all the way to abolishing?
Yeah, perfect. I mean, that's exactly like what I was talking about, the North Star, right? When I've proposed these things on Facebook and Twitter, I get a
Mhm.
lot of pushback. Some people go, "That's not radical enough. You need to abolish all taxes, to zero." And then other
Right.
people are like, "That's way too radical. You need to like aim for something lower," right? And so that's kind of why I said I would take whatever Congress gave as a reduction, right? And I would be pushing for negotiating those reductions in taxes. But some of the ideas that I have, I think the FICA tax is it harms our GDP and it
Mhm.
harms the regular folks of America. Like I think FICA tax is one of the grossest infringements upon people because it just steals your money as a regular worker, right? And growing up poor and having worked in regular wage jobs, I know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck and eat top ramen at the end of the month because you've run out of money, right? And so I'd like to put more money in citizens' pockets, regular citizens' pockets. So I would like to slash FICA taxes. I would. There's a big problem with where you have if you're employed with a regular employer, the FICA is paid by your employer and yourself, right? It's like split 50-50.
Mhm.
And but if you are like an Uber driver or you are a gig worker or you're a small business owner, your FICA is different, right? It's not the same. And so we've been kind of proposing this fair FICA system, right? Where essentially all workers, regardless of whether you work for a corporation or where you work for yourself, would have the same FICA rules. And that's one way. I think like all my plans are basically geared toward trying to make things fair for
Mhm.
all people, right? Right now, you hear all this talk about income inequality, right? And that the money is all flowing to the top. And for me, where that stems from 100% is the Federal Reserve and our monetary system, right? They continuously create these boom bust cycles, and every time there's a boom bust cycle from the Fed, essentially there's a giant transfer of wealth from the bottom people to the top echelons of people, and you see that with the bank bailouts, and people know that, people see what's going on, right? That the Federal Reserve is a toxic system, right? And that it is basically in place to funnel money from regular hardworking folks up to the top echelons of the financial system. And so, that's, of course, I'd like to abolish the Fed or shrink or reduce the Fed as much as possible. Fractional reserve currency, this idea that we can create $10 out of $1 and magically money on people and just the whole thing is just ludicrous. And it's that was one of the reasons I voted for Ross Perot and for Ron Paul twice, was that the things that really resonated, their messaging that resonated with me from those guys was this unimaginable debt that we're burdened with.
Mhm.
And then just the whole Federal Reserve System and how crooked it is, right? And I think we're reaching a point where the debt is gonna it's going to start causing real problems, right? Like I think we've kind of sailed under the radar so far, and all these people that love modern monetary theory, they keep saying, oh, we could just keep printing our way out of everything, and because we're the world reserve currency, we can just pay for everything
Right.
endlessly. But with the interest rates that have gone up recently, the interest on the debt this year is going to be north of $1 trillion. Okay, the entire federal military budget is less than $1 trillion. So we're now spending more money on interest on our debt service than we do on our entire military, right? And I think you start looking at some of the numbers, and you're like, this is unsustainable. We're at a critical tipping point right now, and all of these programs that everybody relies on are in, deep jeopardy. Social Security, Medicare, all the social programs that we have are teetering on the brink of destruction, right? And it's because they're unsustainable. They were a Ponzi scheme to begin with, and the chickens are going to come home to roost really soon. I think within the next 10 years, I think we're going to have major financial crisis around our debt and around our dollar.
Okay. So everything that you just said, totally agree with. However, I feel that it was kind of spoken in a libertarian sense.
Yep.
Any libertarian who might be listening to this broadcast, this episode, they're going to listen and they're going to hear it, and they're going to understand everything you said. Modern monetary theory, if I can even say the word, the Federal Reserve, fractional banking, like these things are like common terms in the libertarian community. However, one of the big catches that we argue about internally is that the position of the role of the presidential candidate is to be a messenger. And earlier you did mention like you had grown up, very poor, and that there were times I think you said you were sleeping in a shed or something like that. And that, you know exactly what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck. So in my mind, I envision that there are many, many voters out there who maybe they're not quite that poor, right? But they are living paycheck to paycheck. They're more worried about, oh my gosh, what happens if the refrigerator breaks down? I'm not going to have the money, and it's starting to act a little quirky right now, right? And they're not people that they don't sit around talking about MMT, modern monetary theory. They may not even know what fractional banking is. So can you break all of that down, like why people would care? Like, talk to me like I'm a person that I just described that doesn't know all those things, and tell me why I should care about the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, when I'm messaging to regular folks, what I'm talking about is inflation, because that's the thing that everybody can kind of, grapple with right now and understands, right? That, I put out a post yesterday about gas in my town is back over $5 a gallon, right? And people were like, there was a lot of Democrats telling me I was lying and that that wasn't true. And, I posted some links to, and I even posted a picture of it. And so I think when, most of my friends are just regular construction workers or, work in local shops or whatever. I don't really hang out with, really bigwig financial guys or anything like that. I mean, I do occasionally, but my everyday friends are just regular folks that are struggling, right? And so I hear the stories every day about, what's going on for them, that, they're trying to choose between medicine and food, right? That they can't fill their gas tank, that their rent is like taking up 80% of their money, and they're living on top ramen now for 2 weeks out of the rest out of the month, right? And so I think that we have to like hammer on the inflation thing. It's still it's interesting, like people say, oh well, inflation's come down from 9% to 3%, right? And they're like, okay, but the average person out there doesn't understand that just because inflation came down, that doesn't mean prices came down. That just means the rate of prices going up came down, right? Mm-hmm. And so everybody's waiting for prices to go down. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. This is the new prices, people. This is like where we're at, and they're going to continue to go up. It just is, how much is the rate of it? Is it going to go up, right? And so I think there's a lot of people that are going to be disillusioned because they feel like if as soon as we get inflation under control, prices are going to go back down, and that's just not the case, right? So I think we can kind of hammer on that prices are high, they're going to stay high, and they're going to keep going high. And the reason for that is the Federal Reserve, right? Is the printing of all this money. And so you can kind of talk about that, and then people are like, oh, okay. I mean, it's kind of hard because to me, one of the main things that caused inflation was the massive stimulus checks that went out to everybody and the PPP loans that went out to all the corporations. I mean, that was literally trillions of dollars that entered into the system. And we had those trillions of dollars that were newly created dollars in the system chasing supply chain shortages of goods, right? So you have lots and lots of money chasing too few goods. That's just basic economics, right? The price is going to go up dramatically. And so, and I think, everybody liked those stimulus checks, right? Like everybody's like, I got $1,200 bucks. I mean, I heard all kinds of people like, bro, I'm making more money today than I did when I was working. Like, I'm not even working right now because I don't need to, because I got these stimulus checks coming in, right? Or I bought a new snowmobile or a new jet ski or something like that. And I was just shaking my head because I knew that wasn't a long-term, thing. And it kind of, one of the things that's sort of interesting about it is, there was all this talk about universal basic income for a while, right? Well, we essentially saw what will happen if you inject universal basic income into the economy on a steady, ongoing basis. It's going to be massive inflation, right? Because it devalues the worth of the currency. If you're just handing out currency to everybody, then it's not as valuable, right? And so, and that devaluation essentially is inflation, and your dollar doesn't go as far as it used to.
Gotcha. So let's shift gears here a little bit. A while back, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, I'm not even sure when it was. I remember getting a card in the mail, like a little postcard, and it was from
Yep.
you,
Okay.
like a campaign ad. And my first thought was, who's Lars? Like, I don't even know who this guy is right now. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean a whole lot necessarily. There's plenty of people in the libertarian community that I'm not necessarily familiar with.
Yep.
But I assume that your profile, has increased among not only libertarians, but also non-libertarians as well. So what I'm curious is, you know, will how will you continue to raise your profile, and, and what kind of things are you going to do to make that happen? Because at the end of the day, as a presidential candidate, your profile, like the name recognition means like a lot. So how do you
Yeah.
do that?
Yeah. Well, I think number one is social media, obviously, because that's my wheelhouse. And I think today I'm going to cross 30,000 followers on Twitter, and I've really only been pushing that for like less than a year. And now I've kind of, it's the momentum is growing dramatically. I'm growing 500 plus followers a day right now. So I think by the time we have the nomination, I'm going to be well over 100,000, maybe 200,000 people there. I'm reaching like 5 or 6 million people every couple of weeks on Twitter, and the same on Facebook. I have like 37,000 followers on Facebook, and it's kind of the same. There was in August last year, I reached, I want to say 17 million people in 1 month on social media. So the reach is good. It's mostly like unfortunately, like base messaging doesn't work on social media that much. Like it doesn't get any reach at all. So I use memes to kind of get my points across, and then I can sometimes slip in some messaging with those or whatever. But I think that's working. And when I was running my company, I'd never had to really speak publicly. It wasn't a thing that was in my wheelhouse, right? And so I would talk to people one-on-one, or I'd talk to people in small group meetings or whatever. But I never really was like a public speaker. And so I knew that was going to be one of my weaknesses. And so like for the last maybe year and a half, I've been doing Toastmasters, and I hired several people to help me with my public speaking. And I'm still working on that. I have a huge team of people now. I have a comms team. I have a policy team. I have, various advisors all helping me out with that kind of stuff. So, we're really like leveling up our messaging, and that has been drawing in a lot of media. So for instance, I went on Kim Klacik is like a radio host out of Baltimore, right?
Okay.
And she's a conservative radio host, and she said that she found me through my memes. She's like, I saw something funny that you posted up, and so I wanted to have you on my show, right? And so I think that that messaging is starting to work, and it's kind of it's a slow start. It's just like building your social media account. You kind of start out slow, but once it gets going, it snowballs, right? And so my whole idea is to continue to get more and more media under my belt, and then just keep knocking on the door of bigger and bigger media until I can reach, the Joe Rogans of the world, those kind of people, so that I can get the real messaging out there. And I think that that's totally achievable before the election, especially if I win the nomination. I think that's super achievable, right? So, I've been going on a lot of Twitter Spaces. I've been going on a lot of podcasts like this. I probably got 30 or 40 of them under my belt. I went to Freedom Fest a couple weeks back, and that was really awesome. I did 5 or 6 radio shows there, and I was a speaker on the main stage there, which was really kind of an amazing experience because there was like 500 or 600 people in the audience, and I was with Larry Elder and a sitting congressman from Ohio that's on the finance committee, as well as Matt Kibbe was the host, and so it was really good. And I got a couple good "and the feds" into the into the audience, and people were clapping about that. So it's kind of interesting that Ron Paul's message is still resonating with people. That that there are still people out there that do know that the Federal Reserve is toxic and is the cause of a lot of the problems that we have and needs to be abolished.
Got it. So do you think that you will be able to translate? So it sounds like you've kind of got a strong plan for social media, but I tend to believe that social media doesn't always translate to the real world. And
Yep.
just to kind of give you a little bit of evidence of that, while you were talking, I looked up Joe Jorgensen, our previous presidential candidate, and she currently has 155,000 followers, and her numbers when come election time were not all that necessarily impressive.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is what happens on social media is very distinct from what happens in the real world. So do you have a plan in place to really move forward with the real world, or at least translate the results that you're getting from online to the real world so that, people would actually vote for you?
Yeah. So, I went when I was in Memphis for this Freedom Fest. I got to meet with RFK. Had a talk with him, and I actually challenged him to a debate with Vivek Ramaswamy. And I think he declined, but there is a potential debate brewing between kind of the dark horse candidates, and I keep pushing for that on social media because it's once you are like side by side with people, that gives you credibility, right? As soon as you're like on the stage with this guy or that guy, like just being on the stage with Larry Elder and this congressman, like lifted my, status a little bit, right? And so I know that you get credibility by essentially who you hang out with and who you're associated with, right? So part of my whole strategy is just to engage with those people and get them to engage with me, because as soon as they engage with you, you're platformed, right? And so that's a big part of it. And obviously, if we had debates with those guys, they get a lot of media attention. And so if we were able to get a debate with those guys, not necessarily the national debate that's televised, but maybe a Twitter Spaces, or maybe on a Joe Rogan or something like that, where it's a debate between the dark horse candidates, I think that would really go a long way to elevating us and making us well known.
Okay. So shifting gears again, let's talk about some money.
Okay.
I looked up the FEC records, and it looks like you have currently the most money of any of the current candidates that have filed. Now, it looks like a lot of it comes from personal loans. So self-funding aside, do you believe that you can outraise the other potential libertarian candidates, and how would you do that?
Yeah, 100%. I can outraise them. We're really starting to launch into that. You're going to start seeing in the next FEC filing. You'll see that we're starting to really raise a lot more money. Obviously, none of the candidates have really raised a ton of money, right? Like it's the party's not raising a lot of money right now, and it's hard for the candidates to raise a lot of money as well. But we have a really good team of people who are good at fundraising. Outside of part of the issue is that you can only raise $3,300 per person, right? So even if you find people that can be max donors, you need a lot of them to get to $100,000, right? And it's just that there's not, and we're drawing from a small pool, right? Like there's only 700,000 registered libertarians in the country, right? And so, and not all of those people are millionaires and can write fat checks, right? And so that's a challenge, but I'm working on some way. I'm pretty creative when it comes to marketing, and so I'm working on some ways to essentially get more money. And one of the things that I've been pushing around the country is this kind of idea of a PAC that would work for all libertarian candidates. Gold is what I've been calling it, but the name could change. But essentially, the Republicans and Democrats have a thing called Act Blue and Win Red that they do all their fundraising to, right? And this isn't a problem just for the presidential candidate. You ran for office, and you know how challenging it is to raise money, right?
Oh, I didn't run.
You didn't run. I thought you would run. Okay.
No, we had 3 candidates in my affiliate running.
Yeah, okay.
So I was spearheading that a little bit.
I gotcha. And so that it's hard for people to raise a lot of money, right? It's not easy to do. And so I think that's, being able to self-finance is critical at this point, right? It's because it allows me to get my message out to more people than any of the other candidates that are out there. And that will continue to be, like I said, my company was doing $350 million a year in annual revenues. So I have significant resources that I can spend on this campaign to launch that into get to as many people as possible, right? And not only that, but because I'm good at social marketing and good at ad buys, I've literally spent probably in my career $1 billion on ad buy on social media, right? And so I know how to spend money the wisely and efficiently. So every dollar that I do get in is going to have a multiple effect compared to the other candidates, essentially, just because of the ability that I have to market.
Right. So if you spent $1 billion, did you get a return that was larger
Oh
than that?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it was mostly through a friend finder bought massive amounts of Google ads and of affiliate marketing, paying out people for putting banner ads on their websites and that sort of thing. So and I did that for many years. So we were spending vast sums of money. Like I said, $350 million a year of revenue. A lot of that was from ad buy. So you can crunch the numbers there, and it gets to $1 billion pretty quickly.
Okay, awesome. So, what else have we not discussed? I tried to stay away from some of the more obvious ones that people have probably already asked you, like, what is your top policy position? What do
Yeah.
things about guns, things that libertarians are pretty standard about asking.
Yeah.
So what have you not been asked on my podcast or any other podcast that you like, what, I really need to talk about this?
Yeah. So look, it's a long shot to win the presidency, right? Like for as a libertarian, it's an uphill battle, right? Just financially, getting the message out that you talked about, all those kind of things are part of the uphill battle to win the presidency. And so, a couple years back, when I was really starting to dig into libertarianism, I started listening to Larry Sharp, right? And he brought up this idea of winning an electoral vote for the Libertarian Party. And I was like, oh, that's an achievable. So I started really looking into it, and I was like, this is an achievable goal. Like, we could win an electoral vote, right? And I started looking around, what states could we do it in, and how much marketing dollars would it take, and that sort of thing. And I was like, imagine on election night, they're going across the map, and California is blue, and Texas is red, and Florida is red, and New York is blue. And then they're like, what the hell is this gold doing on the map? Right? Like, and imagine on election night that we were the deciding factor. The libertarians were the deciding factor in the election, and it threw the election to the House of Representatives to decide who was going to be president. Like, the talking heads their minds would explode, right? And everybody would be talking about libertarians nonstop. Like, I think that's the biggest thing that we can do to get people to really Google what is a libertarian, right? Is to cause chaos in the election, be the deciding factor in the election. And so I'm aiming to do that. And I feel like there's a couple states, there's 3 or 4 states that I looked at. We're still kind of fully deciding which one we're going to go to, but we've narrowed it down. And some of these electoral votes are represented by only 300,000 votes to win an electoral vote, right? So Jeff Hewitt in Riverside, California, ran for supervisor, and there was 1 million people in his supervisorial district, right? And he won his election, and with not a crazy amount of funding, right? So I know that this is achievable. If we end up going into these states and we say, look, this is ground zero for libertarians, where we're going to put libertarians on the map by winning this electoral vote and giving libertarians the legitimacy that they deserve, and really making a splash, we can get people who do door knocking. I want people in every coffee shop, in every barber shop, in every store, on every corner, talking about libertarian ideas, till the people in that town are just completely sick of us, right? Till they're like, just go away, right? I want to just bombard it with TV ads, with advertising on the sides of buses, and internet advertising, because you can spend a lot of money really targeting one specific area and just really focus on that. And if we can start showing that we're winning in the polls in certain states, that can translate over into winning into other states. So I'm focusing early on the early primary states and trying to get some traction in those states to allow us to get better polling, right? And that's one way the system is rigged right now, is that if you want to get in one of these national polls, you have to pay for it. Right? Like, it's funny. There's a Twitter thing that shows polls, and people are like, "Oh, that's a DeSantis poll. Oh, that's a Trump poll. Oh, that's a Biden poll." Right? And it's like, people, when they see those polls, I always thought when I saw those polls that was like legitimate polling, but no, you're just paying to basically have the poll show you in a better favor, right? Like, so if one of the low candidates is doing good, he probably paid for that poll, and he probably paid up to $50,000. And as a candidate in a Libertarian Party, we don't have $50,000 to spend on a poll, right? So that's another way that the system is rigged against us. And so that's another thing that I'm working on, is trying to get into polls. And I think we're going to be launching a couple of our own polls shortly, and I think that will really help kind of push our authenticity and who we are, right?
Okay.
And level us up a bit.
Awesome. Well, let's wind this down. Let's tell everybody where they can find you, all the different places on social media.
Yeah. So Lars24.com is my campaign website. And then you can find me on Facebook, Lars for President. And you can find me on Twitter at Libertarian Lars. And so I'm very active on Facebook and Twitter. The rest of the social media I'm not so active on right now. I'm just kind of putting all my effort into those two things. It's kind of what I know the best.
All right, awesome. And I think you meant X, not Twitter. There's no such thing as
X.
Twitter anymore.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Hang backstage while I close the show out, and then we'll connect real quick again before you take off. So
thanks for having me.
Coming on, and I hope everybody enjoyed the show today. Lars, remember that's Lars24.com. Go out and check out his website, look him up on the different social media platforms. And if you're looking for other episodes of Liberty Dad, you can go to libertydad.com, or you can go to youtube.libertydad.com. You can find the audio and video episodes on those websites respectively. You can also connect with me, Liberty Dad, on Facebook, Liberty Dad Pod on X, what used to be known as Twitter, or go very old school and email me, libertydadpodcast@gmail.com, because I would love to hear from you. And remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. Have a great week.